Hello, this is Kevin Howard, and I'm the host of Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. When I'm recording this episode is Saturday, the day before Super Bowl Sunday. And for those of us who love sports in the United States, this marks the end of one of the peak periods of our sports calendar, the championship of the National Football League. And so tomorrow, everyone will have their barbecue going. They'll have their favorite football snacks, all the goodies, all the friends, whoever has the biggest and best TV. This is where we're gathering for the big game. And we will dive in and we hope that we will have an entertaining game. Sadly enough, half of the 60 Super Bowls that have been played, and this is the 60th one, I should say, half of them, at least, have been dreadful, over by halftime, blowouts. Well, so we're hoping for a good battle tomorrow between the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots. Forgive us if you don't have an interest in sports. This will not be an episode about sports, but that is what's happening in America tomorrow, the day after I recorded this podcast. But after that 3 hours of football and championship football is over, and the lights go out, and the season is over once again, we enter into a period for people who have any interest in sports that I call Death Valley. It is the dead of winter. It's February, and football is over, and all the major sports are at the lull, the very nadir of their seasons. Professional basketball, professional hockey, right? College basketball, all of them are at parts of their seasons that don't mean a lot. And the biggest news that happens in February is a bad thing. Is the risk of some sort of injury that could alter your favorite team's chances once the playoffs begin in a few months. So, during this lull period, this period of time where we are running out of distractions from our daily grind, right? I figure it's time for us to have a podcast that focuses in, takes advantage of this lull period, and asks a basic question. How you doing? And I don't mean this in a way like you're walking down the street and you see your neighbor and say, hey, how you doing? No, we don't want the performative, oh, I'm okay. We want to get real in this conversation and ask the question. Take this lull period that by the time you see this podcast, we have entered because the Super Bowl would have been over. Congratulations to whoever won. And now we have nothing else to distract us from the grind. This is a good opportunity for us to take stock about where we are, how we actually feel. And so we are going to have a serious conversation about how we're doing, right? And because it's a serious conversation, because we plan on being candid and real with each other, because we're good neighbors, by the way, right? It could touch on some sensitive issues. The good news is here on Breadcrumbs, the way we handle conversations allows us to handle sensitive issues, to talk about difficult conversations. Because the way we approach these difficult conversations is to start from our shared experiences and our shared humanity. Why? Well, it has a lot to do with why we can't have serious conversations on social media or in our social discourse or on the news channels. Because the way those conversations that have become normal are conducted is for each of us to sharpen our blades and put forth what makes us unique, what makes us different, why we happen to disagree. And then we never get past that. We don't start that way here on Breadcrumbs, and we don't go there at all. We start from the place of our shared experience. And why? Because we absorb the same primary media. We experience the events of life concurrently. We are told narratives that explain these events, right? We go to similar schools and have learned a similar history. We grew up in a similar country. We live in similar neighborhoods, right? Okay. All those experiences are common to us. And so the good news is we can use that basis as a wellspring along with our shared humanity. I mean, despite our differences, we are all human. And that shared humanity means that there's things about each of us that are the same. Like we breathe air, we need nutrient food, we need fresh, clean water to survive, amongst many other things that we share. So this gives us a massive wellspring, our shared experience and our shared humanity, to find commonality so that when we talk about sensitive subjects, we can remember that, oh, yeah, this is another human being. And if we happen to disagree, it's not because we're not humans. It's not because we don't share all this wellspring of information. It's because maybe we experience something different than the other person. And that's okay too, right? But that's how we handle these conversations here on Breadcrumbs. So as I start sharing in a very candid and open way how I'm doing, I'm inviting you to share in the notes to this episode. How are you doing? Let's have an opening because we've created this safe space here on Breadcrumbs to have a real conversation that needs to be had. Because how we're doing is going to determine what we do next, how well we do it, and whether or not we can actually benefit from the experience that we've had. Okay. So, final bit of repeated advice on this episode is that when you hear the information I share, when you hear me sharing my story, I want you to look at your story. I want you to look at how, in your experience, any of this relates to your experience. And if it makes sense based on your background and your experience, your lived experience, this is how you know you could trust it. If it doesn't, set it aside for future consideration. Because I can tell you, there's not a person listening to this podcast who's not gathered information that didn't make sense in real time. And then later on, they learned something else or experienced something else. And all of a sudden, it did make sense. So don't throw away information when it doesn't make sense. Just hold on to it. But hopefully, most of what we say today, because we're going to be using our shared experiences, will resonate to you. Trust what resonates and set the rest aside. So let us begin. I'm going to start by talking about how I'm doing. And I mean really doing. How is Kevin Howard doing? To be honest, I feel like I'm surfing on the edge of a very high tidal wave, right? And this feeling is, yeah, it's exhilarating. Yeah, it's exciting to be up here, way up high. I haven't wiped out yet, right? Right? But it's frightening and it's turbulent and it's accelerating. So that's a start of how I'm feeling and why. Why am I feeling this way? Because I can tell you, and maybe you see this in what you're experiencing. I exist in a place that I have never been before. Yeah. Last November, November 30th, Kevin Howard turned 60 years old. How am I doing? Okay, 60 years old. And in those 60 years, I had built a successful career both in commercial banking and as a climate risk consultant and a sustainability consultant in both fields. Built success. We're doing well. And then I find myself as I approach my 60th birthday, and all the things that made me successful previously no longer work in this economy. Okay. Now, how many of you out there are finding that no matter whatever your success was earlier, some years ago, not long, but some years ago, increasingly don't seem to be working today? Put your stories in the comments for this episode. Okay. But this is what's driving my feeling on the top of that surfing, at the top of that wave, right? Because I'm not used to not being able to navigate in a way that is predictably successful. I went through the process of making those mistakes and perfecting my skills and knowing that that's an ongoing process. So my skill level continues to grow, continues to be perfected, right? And yet that is not generating more success like it had historically had done. Okay. So because of that, it leads us to the first breadcrumb for this episode. Sometimes life prunes your tree. Now, what are you talking about, Kevin? I'm telling you, you could be going about your business, doing what you know has worked, staying current on top of your game, and the landscape that you're operating changes. And even though you're seeing the changes and you're making adjustments and navigating, nothing seems to work. And so this is what I experienced over the last, let's say, 18 months. Let's say 18 months. So, how did I get there? Okay. I built a very successful commercial banking career. And most of my career, I was a business line, either relationship manager or credit approver on the business line, doing a variety of types of commercial finance. Everything from home builder finance to franchise lending, specialty finance to middle market banking. Financed everything from manufacturing facilities, large animal surgical facilities, charter schools. I covered a lot of the gamut. Okay. And then progressively in my career, I got more into risk management and I moved to portfolio risk management and ultimately to enterprise risk management, which looks at the system wide risks to a financial institution, to the safety and soundness of a financial institution. And at that pinnacle of my career, when I was in enterprise risk management, is when large commercial banks were being asked by the Securities and Exchange Commission and even the Federal Reserve to look into and assess the impact of climate change on the safety and the soundness of financial institutions. And so I was a part of the first team at the fifth largest bank in the country of recognizing climate risk as a vertical one risk for a major commercial banking institution. Loved what I did. Had to go and I was able to obtain the sustainability and climate risk certification from the Global Association of Risk Professionals because your climate knowledge, your knowledge of the science, which is not natural to bankers, is not a financial issue. It's a science issue. You had to gain the knowledge, and that knowledge had to be validated in order for you to lend advice that was going to influence how a $700 billion bank was going to allocate its assets. And so I got that certification and I was able to participate in helping a major financial institution develop their strategic approach. How do you manage climate risk? What is climate risk? How can we participate in mitigating the risk that would impact the bank? And so once I was successful at participating in that process for an institution of that size, fifth largest bank in America, I did what like a lot of ambitious people do. I said, I can put up my own shingle and I could advise top 100 banks on how to do the same thing. If I help number five do it, why can't, I should be able to help number 60. And the thing about America is our commercial banks are pretty large. So even the 100th largest bank in America is a $100 billion bank. So I figured this would be a great opportunity since only the top banks in the country, you know, top 10, 15 banks in the country were taking this thing seriously because the Securities and Exchange Commission and Federal Reserve was getting onto it. And all of a sudden, FDIC was interested in it. And so the largest banks were looking at it, and most of the mid-sized banks and the banks downstream, they tend to watch and see what the largest banks do first, let them figure it out, and then the information works its way through the system. So I was going to be one of those people to work the information through the system. How do you manage climate risk? And so 4 years ago, I started my consulting business, Climate Changes Everything LLC, because it did. Climate does change everything. And it was going gangbusters. It took me a minute. It always does. Who's Kevin Howard? Why should I listen to you? Yes, you came from number five, and I might be number 40. But once again, why not? Why hire you when I can hire Oliver Wyman? They're the big guys. They're helping the top four banks. Why do I need to hire you? Okay, so it took me a minute to be able to make that case of why hire me instead of Oliver Wyman. And by the way, if you work for Oliver Wyman, you did the best. So I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying I was a little micro competitor because they were focused in on the top 25. So why not get number 60, number 70, number 80? They still need help, right? So that's what I was doing. It was working, right? Because the banks I was calling on, very few major climate consulting firms are calling on them yet. See, so I was ahead of the curve in that respect. So once again, so I had success. And then we had a national presidential election, 2024, and Donald Trump got elected again. And so I figured, okay, I know Donald Trump well, as in I know his background and his history. I don't know him personally. His family is from Queens. I grew up in the Bronx. These are neighboring boroughs in New York City. I knew the Trumps back in the 70s in terms of knew of them, knew about their shenanigans, long history. So I felt like I had an understanding of who he was. So now that he got reelected in November of 2024, what my read on him was that even though he had professed to be a climate denier, he really wasn't, it wasn't a priority for him. So I figured, okay, what he was going to do is just not do anything in that space, that he wasn't necessarily going to put his energy into dismantling anything that had been done because he has a lot of stuff that he wants to do. So that's how I figured he was going to be. He was going to focus in on tariffs, and he was going to focus in on negotiating with Putin and Xi and cutting deals internationally. That's what I thought he was going to do, and not really concern himself about climate, which is fine because the Inflation Reduction Act had been the major legislation passed in the previous administration that was attracting major capital into climate risk management and sustainability broadly, because it was a federal matching, capital matching program that would endeavor to de-risk investments in renewable energy, green hydrogen production, or climate technology, all types of things that was going to help in the transition to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Okay. So I figured, great, this is fantastic. The Securities and Exchange Commission just finalized their rule on climate disclosures. More of these financial institutions are going to have to get online by 2027. So here, it should have been, business should have been booming. Okay. January 20th comes, Donald Trump is sworn in, and he immediately takes a hatchet job to the Inflation Reduction Act. The long story short is that by telling the federal regulators, including the Securities Exchange Commission, not to enforce climate requirements, it sent the signal to the financial services industry that their regulators were not going to require them to mitigate this risk, not at this time. in this environment. So therefore, it really wasn't necessary for them to hire me now or hire Oliver Wyman. Sorry, fellas, I'm sure you felt the pinch too, because your price tag is much higher than mine. But the fact is, all of a sudden, people who were seriously interested and ready to get on board found that they didn't have to do it and they didn't see the sense in incurring these kind of expenses to make these kind of changes if their regulator wasn't going to help them to do it. So here, my entire business plan was completely gutted. Okay. So that's my consulting business. I am a very community oriented person. I believe part of active citizenship is you participate in your community, whether it's through your church, through various civic activities or whatever, boards, volunteering, what have you. And so, one of the issues in the climate space that is near and dear to my heart is housing and converting American housing to sustainable housing. Because in our effort and the necessity that we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions rapidly. And that is the emissions that come from using fossil fuels, gas, oil, coal, what have you, methane. Yeah, okay. In the need to have to reduce those, housing is the lowest hanging fruit because the renewable energy that can heat and warm housing is the cheapest and most accessible form of renewable energy. Wind can be used, solar can be used, hydroelectric can be used. It's not a problem. Okay. Heavy industry, marine shipping, major shipping, and stuff like that, more complex versions, technologies involved, green hydrogen and such, ammonia and such. Right. That is much more expensive, much more experimental. So housing is the lowest hanging fruit. So I was starting to serve on some boards. I served on the board of directors for Rooted Homes, which is a not-for-profit home builder that specializes in producing green certified, yeah, renewable energy, fully green certified, energy efficient, single family homes that they targeted selling to at 50 to 80% of area median income. Unbelievable. So I was on their board, big cheerleader for them, helping them do their business. Another entity, EcoThrive Development, up in Berrien, Washington. Fantastic organization focused in on providing affordable housing, condominiums, which would be optimized, energy efficient, and renewable energy where possible, possibly through a community solar, because this was more of a condo project instead of an individual single family house, but nonetheless, energy efficient to help transition housing, both affordability and sustainability. Okay, so two organizations that I had the pleasure of serving on their boards. And just like what happened in my consulting business, where all of a sudden, all my customers who I was able to help no longer needed my help or no longer wanted my help, not because there was anything wrong with my help, but because their regulators weren't going to require it. Even in these board opportunities where I am volunteering my time to help them be more successful, decided over time don't want to do more of what we're doing or we want to do how we're doing it, the way we're doing it. It really doesn't matter if, yes, this is how it's generally done. And thank you so much. And we appreciate all your knowledge and expertise. But at the end of the day, we're going to go on and do it the way we're doing it, even if it's not going to work, even if it's not working, even if it's not even remotely meeting the needs that they're trying to serve. And so you scratch your head and you say, well, you know, thank you, and you step back. And so, as I was going through that process and seeing that volunteer opportunities were going away, professional opportunities were going away, I looked in the mirror at Kevin Howard and I said, what's going on? I mean, do you got a booger on your nose or something? What is happening? Why is it? Is this a Pink Floyd song? Why are they running away? No, well, believe me, I did a lot of soul searching and self-examination in these cases, particularly with my consulting business. And what I found is, no, I had built my career very intentionally. I built my skill sets very intentionally. It wasn't that all of a sudden I got dumb. It wasn't all of a sudden I became a porcupine and didn't know how to talk to people. It wasn't that I didn't know how to read the room anymore. These are all skills that I had to perfect over the course of a very successful career. So those things hadn't changed. What had changed is what's going on in our economy. What's going on in our economy and in our society is putting each of us under the kind of pressure, putting each of us in a circumstance where maybe more than just Kevin Howard, we feel like we're surfing on the very edge of a massive wave and we're not functioning well in that spot. In other words, a lot of us are existing under circumstances that they have never existed before. And that's the swirl of this society. That's the swirl of this economy. And that in the same way that we all know hurt people, if you are under severe distress and you are not functioning well with that, helping that person, even if it's what they actually need, is not necessarily going to be received because they're not in position to receive it. There's a lot of us in that situation. But beyond the psychological aspects of the trauma of life in America today, and that's a serious one because this is everywhere we go. Beyond that, something less obvious but completely pervasive is occurring. Money is getting scarce. Yeah, money, if you happen to work in sustainability, if you happen to work in climate risk management, adaptation, or mitigation, if you happen to be working to develop community wealth, to develop affordable housing, to reverse the trend of severe wealth and income inequality in America. If you're in that segment, and that's a lot, if you work in the regenerative community, and I have network people throughout those industries I just mentioned, over the last 18 months, money is disappearing rapidly. And that is causing a severe amount of stress on people. Okay. So, why is money becoming so scarce? Well, and we've covered the economics of the country and the trend in our economics over the last 50 years. So, on one level, there has been an intention amongst extreme wealth to break the back of shared prosperity in America. This is something that started back in the 70s and it's progressively gotten worse ever since. And I've covered it in multiple episodes of Breadcrumbs. The actual receipts, the evidence, the validated and verified evidence of how extreme wealth has done this across Democratic and Republican administrations. Okay, so we know that's one thing, one trend, is that wealth and income inequality is becoming severe and increasingly so in America. Okay, so that's one way that money is becoming scarce, but that's broadly, that's every industry. Every level of worker is getting paid less, but in the bottom 90% of workers is getting paid materially less than they made 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Yeah. Okay. So that's across industries, but it's acute in the industries that I named. These are industries that are trying to replace our energy system. For example, renewable energy is a huge part of the mitigation strategy for the climate crisis. And so, to the extent that you want to shift out of fossil fuels to renewable energy, there are people who have interests in fossil fuels who don't want that. In the industries that are actually trying to deal with the climate crisis, that are trying to reverse the wealth and income inequality, capital has targeted those industries and said, you know what? If you want to try to reverse what we're doing, if you want to try to reverse the energy we're using, you're not going to get capital from us to do it. And that is fully exacerbated what has happened in the space of sustainability, climate adaptation, climate mitigation, affordable housing, community wealth building, all those type of solutions where people are trying to help people and stuff like that so that they could be less desperate. Yeah. Try to find money because all of a sudden it doesn't seem to be anywhere. Okay. So this leads to a thought process that I want you to consider. And I did not realize it until my tree was pruned. And it's the second breadcrumb. When life creates space, don't hurry to fill it. So when my tree got pruned, my opportunities to serve on boards fade away. My whole business model and all my customers fade away. And now I have this space that yes, I need to make some money. I have some savings. So it's not like, okay, we got time. What I did was it gave me the pause to look at the landscape and discover that money had become severely scarce. That not only had it become scarce because of these longer trend things, but that narrow to what I was trying to do. I was a part of the effort of people trying to rebuild empowerment in the country or to address the climate crisis, which involves us shifting our energy system, that we were being targeted, not personally, just by industry, in terms of capital saying, you're not going to use exploitative capital to, or capital derived from exploitation. And let me be clear what I mean by exploitation. Anytime you pay less than what something is worth, that's exploitation. And the way the capitalist profit seeking model works is you always pay the people who produce whatever they're producing less than those things can be sold for, less than they're worth. And the difference is your profit. Yeah, that's exploitation. I mean it literally, not as a criticism. And so capital that is raised out of the business as usual model, which absolutely exploits the employees who work for, who produce it. It exploits the customers who buy it. It exploits the communities that it serves. The only stakeholder that capital raised through exploitation serves is the shareholder, the owner. Other than that, everyone else is getting exploited. Check it out. Okay. And so what exploitative capital is saying, we are not going to finance any alternatives to how we do business or to our system as it is right now. So if you're trying to do some sort of regenerative economics, if you're trying to do some sort of community wealth system where you don't plug into Amazon and the billionaire class and stuff like that, oh no, find a way to do that without our money. And I guess advancing their own self-interest, you can understand why. But it became clear over the last 18 months because everyone in this space is starving for cash. And so, yeah, everyone is desperate. Everyone is tightening their belts to try to survive. But it's happened long enough to where, like in my business, you start to realize the choice that you are increasingly left with. Either return to the exploitative model or starve. Yeah, that's what I was faced with in my business model. Go back to commercial banking, start doing deals, forget about this climate stuff. I would have done mid six figures. Back to the game. Or watch your savings dwindle. Yeah, I laugh, but yeah, I'm watching it dwindle. Okay. And so many of us are in that spot. And so many of us, because we got bills to pay, because credit would blow up, we got kids to send to college, whatever, right? Are making the decision to move progressively towards exploitation. And tragically, what I'm seeing is many allies who are in the space of climate are moving to the areas of climate that are exploitative. And what area is that? Climate tech. Yeah, I'm calling y'all out because that's what it is. There's plenty of money in climate tech. In other words, technology, advanced technology that solves the problems that must be solved in order to transition the global economy to renewable energy. Things like developing a technology that allows us to take solar generation in Arizona and ship it up to Minnesota without losing the energy. These kind of technologies, battery technology. And so in the climate space, the way they're supposed to be different is because once that technology is developed, it was going to be mass distributed because in order to address the climate problem, it's a global problem. And so everyone would need to be able to get the technology. But that's not how technology is used in a free market economy. If you invent something that everyone must have, it always all of a sudden becomes the next multi-billion-dollar project, which discriminates against people who can't afford it. In other words, you don't get maximum distribution. It goes to the highest bidders. And so it would not solve a global problem to have the people who could afford it to be able to use the technology. That game is still alive and well. So thank you, Climate Tech, for just feeding the hedge funds another source of innovation. But that's not going to solve the climate crisis if we don't do the mass distribution. Case in point, an alternative example of what I'm criticizing the climate tech folks are doing is what happened with the COVID vaccines, where we had three major pharmaceutical who used taxpayer funded RMNA technology to devise those vaccines. Somehow they get proprietary rights to it. Fine. So they have these vaccines and then they charge $20 a shot. And the distribution of those vaccines in a global pandemic came down to your willingness to pay that ransom. And so when India, 1.4 billion people, says that they can't afford to pay it, can they have permission because it's a global pandemic to mass produce? Can they get the patent so that they can mass produce it in India? They're not trying to make money, they're trying to alleviate a global pandemic. No, it wasn't allowed to happen. That is what capital does. In order to protect the profits, we'd rather people die of COVID. Yeah, yeah, that's the flip side. Okay. Well, what do you think is going to happen in climate tech? It's the same thing, which is why climate tech can still get money. Okay. My point being here is if you are part of any type of economic effort that would either reverse the severe wealth and income inequality in this country or would replace the energy system that exploitative capital is using, you're going to find that your money, that you can't find capital now. Right. Now, it's not that there's no capital available. It's just that most of the capital that's available from most of the traditional sources is derived from the business as usual model, the exploitative model. And as a result, they seem to have made a decision because it's everywhere that they're not going to finance their replacement. So what do we do? Well, this leads to breadcrumb number three. 99% of our population produce everything that is produced in the economy. If we want to break the dependency that we have on the ultra elite, we have to find ways of producing the things that we need for each other to take care of each other, even when money gets scarce. The only power that extreme wealth has over all of us is money. And they have demonstrated on the individual level and on the national level that when you don't do what they want you to do, your money disappears. They can pull that back. So the only way to break that dependency on them and the money that they control is that we have to start doing for each other, even when money is not available. Because we already do it. We already have all the skills. We already have the materials. My point being is that we have to find and devise ways with the resources that we have amongst us, the 99%, to make sure that we do these things, that we do what needs to get done for each other. And we can do that because they are intending to continue to make the wealth and income inequality in this country more severe, more severe. And they're intending on not allowing anyone to replace their system of exploitation, whether it's the energy system or just the business as usual model. So if you work in any sphere that's endeavoring to do any of that, yeah, we need to come together and figure out a way to provide for each other because money is going to be scarce here on out. And on that note, I'd like to read a commentary that's relevant, and it's from my book, Onward at Last, the 2024 Presidential Election Edition. And this commentary is called They Are Our Enemy. They are our enemy. They who divide us. They who benefit from our fighting. They who win while the rest of us lose. They who own our government. They who control the resources that sustain us. They are the cause of our American nightmare. Who are they? The nameless, faceless, thoughtless they? They are the hoarders who derive their gluttonous wealth from the productivity of our labor. Yet they are the embodiment of the values we are taught to live by. Nonetheless, they are getting worried. They realize we are awakening. Too many of us see past their grand illusion. Try as they may, they can't conceal the big lie behind the prevailing narrative they sell. We are beginning to see who they are, where they are, and how they control us. They have privilege, but the power is provided by our consent. Now ask yourself, who stands in the way of your highest aspirations? They who claim everything. They are our enemy. So, in the face of my pruned tree, I chose to fight back. I chose to fight back, first and foremost, by launching this podcast, Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. Is it? It's not working. Okay. And this is episode 20. In the 19 previous episodes of this podcast, since we began October 1st, we have discussed the current state of the economy and our politics. We have discussed the political and the economic history that led us to this American nightmare, which involved the biggest transfer of wealth in global history. As the Rand Corporation in their 2020 report demonstrated, if you compare the distribution of income in the United States from 1946 to 1975, if you compare that, when America was as equal as America has ever been, to the distribution of income from 1976 to 2020, you will find that $50 trillion was extracted from the bottom 90% of earners in America to the top 1% of the country. $50 trillion. And that if those bottom 90% of American households were paid the same income distribution as the Americans, the predecessor generation of Americans from 1946 to 1975, you would have to pay each American worker in the bottom 90% of the country $600,000 in back pay. Yeah, that's how much wealth they have extracted from us. So, yeah, we discussed all this detail. We talked about how the virtues and the values and the prevailing narratives that we are told distort how we see ourselves, distort how we see each other, and distort how we understand the world. And why? To manipulate our consent. Yeah, to manufacture our consent. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chomsky. We also discussed in these previous 19 episodes, okay, it's a shit show. This is where we are. Where are we going? What could a future economy, future society look like that serves all of us? Yeah, we talked about that too. And here in this 20th episode, we're talking about how we are actually doing. Because my friends and neighbors, we're at the point where we have to check in and we have to stiffen our back and we have to find our way to pull together in order to meet the challenges we face now. Because these challenges are unlike anything any of us have experienced. I mean, this is Great Depression and beyond type challenges, which is one of the reasons why I feel like I'm on the very top of this huge wave. And that the slightest thing, that all my skill is spent staying on that board because the wipeout will be catastrophic. Yeah. And I think a lot of people watching this podcast feel the same way. They know the slightest left or right. And then they're carrying the sign and wonder how they got here. So, with my tree pruned by life, by our economics, by our politics, it freed me to put all my energy into how to curate, how to cultivate new opportunities to do the work that must be done. I chose not to go back and exploit. I chose to move forward and see if I can build something, participate in building something that would be worthy of our progeny. Okay? And so that leads me to breadcrumb number 4. The one thing still true about this crazy economy is you can make good money by solving a major problem that affects many people. Well, the biggest problem that's affecting the largest swath of the American public is the housing affordability crisis. We have talked about this in multiple podcasts here because it's that important. Epstein. Who cares about what the rich elite and how decadent they are? That is not affecting the lives of most people. I could care less. It is both left and right. It is Donald Trump and it's Bill Clinton and it's Prince William. It is all of those elites. Who's surprised that they are as decadent and as pathetic and as sick as they actually are? But that doesn't affect our lives. The housing affordability crisis is creating a massive problem in America. And so, in case you're just discovering it, and I doubt it, and in case you haven't heard this in other episodes of Breadcrumbs, I'm just going to give you a brief summary. Okay? When we came out of COVID in 2021 and reopened the economy, to buy a single family home in America, the median home price was $340,000 and the interest rate was 2.9%. Middle class people could afford to buy that house and we're buying them. Due to some shenanigans that I absolutely have covered in previous episodes, institutional investors drove up the price of housing over the course of the first couple of years coming out of COVID. And what that did was create a situation where by 2025, last January, the median house price was $440,000. But in the rapid increase in housing values, the inflation on houses, that spiked overall inflation. And we don't have to get into the economics of the wealth effect associated with driving up the asset price of houses and what that did to people who exist and own houses and how they spent more money because they had more value. Okay. All we could say is that by April of 2022, inflation had spiked to 9.1%. And yes, it has progressively come down, but it never gave anything back. So every bit of inflation since April 2022 of 9.1% is on top of the 9.1%. Okay, so don't tell me that inflation is 3% or 3.5% or whatever, as if that's good news when it's over and above the 9.1%. It never got negative, so therefore it's cumulative. Yeah. And so the value of a home went up 28% in that 4-year period. Okay, and the combination of that going up and the 30-year fixed rate mortgage going up from 2.9% to 6.1% is it priced out the median middle class household. Yeah. So for the first time in US history, the median middle class household can no longer afford to buy the average American home in the average American city. Yeah. And the net effect of that is that those households who used to be able to buy houses, they're bidding up rents. Yeah. Not because they want to bid up rents. They don't want to pay higher rents. It's that the people who own rental properties understand that there's a new category of renter who makes a good deal more money than historically rents accommodated. Why? Because they used to be able to buy a house. Now they can't buy a house. Now they have nowhere to go. They got to pay the rent and they're paying higher rents. And that drove rents 30%. So for people with lower incomes, 200% of the federal poverty level. And yeah, if you think that's low, that for a family of three, that's $55,000 a year. Yeah, that is way across the working class of this country. $55,000 a year for a family of three. Yeah, for those people, for those households, the Urban Institute's recent study indicates that 52% of them are reporting food insecurity. Okay, food insecurity in America. Call your local food bank and ask them how they're doing. They want to come on the podcast and tell you a story because they can't keep the food in. We have food insecurity as a major problem in this country. So the housing affordability crisis that has priced out middle class households from buying a home has blown up rent inflation in the country to the point where lower income households now are choosing to pay their rent and eat less. Yeah, this is a devastating trend in America. So my focus, my new mission is to do something to solve this problem. And so I took my 30 years of banking experience and I said, we have something called the sustainable debt market. This is a market covered by all three rating agencies on Wall Street. the sustainable debt market, where impact investors are willing to take a lower than market return on their investment to achieve a social justice goal, wealth and income inequality, or a sustainability goal to fund renewable energy development, climate tech, what have you, in the sustainability regenerative area. Okay. So we have investors willing to take a lower than market return on investment to achieve those kind of goals. And in 2024, the total fundings for the sustainable debt market was 1.74 trillion. Yeah, I didn't stutter. 1.74 trillion. So I said, okay, there are impact investors who are willing to help solve this problem. It just hasn't been applied to housing. I have an idea. And I took an existing financial instrument called the home equity agreement. And it is a dreadful financial instrument. It is classic exploitation. Hedge funds, this is how they make their money. But I took that instrument whose pricing is, I think it's usury, but I know that's a legal term. It's a payday loan for your house. How about that? It, I took that instrument and I repriced it for affordability. And now I believe it can be used because it's already legal in 32 states. Thank you, hedge funds. They actually did $1 billion worth of business in 2024 with the home equity agreement. Yeah, only in America. Okay, so it's a legal financial instrument and it works. If you price it for affordability, which I did, what we can do is we can create a proof of concept phase where impact investors help credit qualified, income verified, middle class households who have been priced out of the housing market since 2021, those households, to buy a sustainable, affordable home. And the way that would happen is the impact investor would cover the gap between the current price of the home and what that middle class, credit qualified, income verified household could afford. On the median level, it's like $100,000. And then when you tag on $30,000, between $30,000 and $35,000, you can make that house green certified by upgrading the HVAC and the heating with heat pump, energy efficient heat pumps, and putting solar panels on the roof. You could make this house both affordable and sustainable. The gap would be like $130,000 for the median household. More expensive in Seattle, less expensive in Albuquerque, right? Okay, but here you go. Okay, so this would be a way that impact investors can help middle class households afford to buy a house. And we can generate fees off that transaction, which doesn't occur in the economy today. And as a side note, a recent Redfin active agent survey indicated that 71% of all active agents in the United States did not do one home sale in the last year that was recorded. Just wrap your brain around how frozen the residential housing market is when 71% of active agents haven't completed one sale for the year. Okay, well, using this instrument that I'm talking about is called a price gap agreement, which is a affordably priced version of the home equity agreement. Impact investors can unfreeze the housing market by allowing credit qualified, income verified middle class households to allow them to buy a sustainable, affordable single family house. And then you could take the fees off that transaction and you can use it to subsidize the rent of the housing unit that the middle class household was occupying, the middle class household that could not afford to buy a house. They now have a house. The fees, some fees from that transaction can subsidize the rent in the apartment or the house that they were renting for a lower income family to make it affordable. Okay. This could be a system in which impact investors help middle class families, and middle class families help working class families, and we get off the edge of alleviating food insecurity amongst lower income families in America. Okay. This is my idea. It's an elegant idea. It's a simple idea. It will absolutely work if we pull together, if we come together and start helping each other. So, how am I really doing? I'm mad as hell. I really am. But I'm harnessing my energy, my anger. And I'm angry because of the senseless suffering that is happening in the wealthiest country in the world. But I'm harnessing the anger to put my energy into real solutions, pragmatic solutions that can reduce the unnecessary suffering and hardship that our neighbors are going through right now while we work on the long term effort to build community again, to build society again, to build an economy again that serves all of us. Yeah. So that's how I'm feeling. So now I'm asking you, how you doing? For real. Did any of this resonate with you? Do you too feel like you're riding on the edge of a very big wave? Do you feel like I do, that you exist under circumstances that you've never experienced before? Have you found that the things that used to work and the methods that you use to improve yourself just don't seem to have the same effect as they once had? Yeah. These are bizarre times. But one thing that is still true is that we are empowered to respond to these times if we use the skills and the talents that we have to come together, to take care of each other, and to rebuild to a future that would be worthy for our children and our children's children. This is Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. Thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoyed the Super Bowl. Congratulations to who won. And I will see you the next time in the conversation. You take care.